In the year 2019, a little girl writes a letter saying she will never change or grow up, and she can't take it anymore. She leaves her house to watch the sunrise, and when she looks up, we see her yellow eyes. She's a vampire. When the sun rises, her whole body burns. Then we see that the world is empty during the day. A plague caused by an infected bat in 2009 has turned most of humanity into vampires. The number of humans is dropping fast, and researchers are trying to find blood substitutes to feed the vampires, while a small group fights for the rights of humans, since they are being hunted and farmed. When night falls, the world comes to life again. We see vampires living their normal lives like humans used to, hanging out and going to work. There's even a homeless vampire begging for blood who threatens a random person, but the police use electricity to stop him. Meanwhile, our main character, Edward Dalton, is taking his car and then the subway to work. He is a hematologist for Bromley Marks, a pharmaceutical company and a major blood supplier. After going through security at the entrance of the building, Edward walks by rooms with machines that farm humans, which he hates, and then goes to his lab. He is trying to find a blood substitute, but his most recent attempt has failed again. Later, he meets with his boss, Charles Bromley, his lab partner, Christopher Caruso, a commissioner, and an army officer. The commissioner tells them about the results of an experiment they did on a death row inmate. This man was chosen for a study about the effects of not having blood. Because of the lack of blood, his brain's frontal lobe completely broke down. The first sign was that his ears got longer. He quickly turned into a Nosferatu-like creature with no rational thoughts or feelings. They call these creatures subsiders, and they are becoming a problem in the streets. Only 5% of the human population is left, and if they don't find a substitute soon, all of them will become subsiders. Bromley then pulls Edward aside for a private talk in his office. Edward ignores the coffee with blood he is offered while Bromley shares his story. He had cancer, but vampirism cured him. However, his daughter refused to turn into a vampire and ran away. Bromley knows that Edward cares about humans, and so does he. That is why they need to start testing soon to help save the human race. Edward goes back to his lab and talks to Christopher. After some hesitation, Christopher points out that since the substitute is working on a monkey, it is time to stop testing on animals. Soon after, they begin the test while Bromley and some officers watch through a window. Edward carefully injects the substitute into a soldier, who at first seems fine, but after the full dose, he throws up and starts shaking violently as horrible blisters appear all over his body. The researchers quickly hold him down and inject him with a drug that stops his shaking and makes the blisters go away, but a second later, his whole body explodes. Later that night, Edward leaves the office and drives home. He watches the news on his car, which is talking about riots related to blood rationing plans. While scratching his ear, he notices something is wrong. He opens his mirror and sees that his ears are starting to grow long. This distraction makes him miss seeing a car coming towards him, but he dodges at the last second and stops his car, while the other car crashes into a fence. Edward gets out to help and gets hit in the arm by an arrow. The people getting out of the other car are humans, and their leader, Audrey Bennett, is holding a crossbow to defend herself from vampires. Suddenly, police sirens are heard, so Edward promises he just wants to help and asks the humans to get in his car. They hesitate, but then agree. Edward puts the car into protection driving mode, which turns the windows black, then removes the arrow from his arm just as the police arrive. While lying to the police about which way the humans ran, Audrey finds Edward's ID badge and learns what he does. After the police leave, the humans get out of the car, and Audrey wishes Edward a happy birthday before they walk away. A moment later, Edward arrives home, where a community announcement warns everyone about the coming sunrise. Once at home, he has dinner and tends to his plants when his brother Frankie Dalton, who he hasn't seen in months, shows up. Frankie joined the army while he was away. Frankie comments on how there's no birthday party, and Edward says he has turned 35 10 times already, but Frankie doesn't care. He thinks they should celebrate, and he brings an expensive bottle of 100% pure human blood. Frankie pours 2 glasses and jokes about Edward drinking pig blood, but Edward refuses. This makes Frankie angry, and he starts an old argument with Edward. Edward does not touch human blood but still works for a company that farms humans, which he sees as a necessary evil to find the substitute. Yet he looks down on Frankie for hunting humans for the army. Edward suddenly grabs the blood bottle and pours it outside, but Frankie takes it from him and smashes it against the wall before trying to leave. He can't leave, though, because a subsider gets in his way. The creature enters the kitchen, licks the blood off the walls, and then goes for the glass on the table. Frankie grabs a knife, which scares the subsider and makes it push him against the wall. He falls on a glass table and is knocked out for a few seconds. The subsider then approaches Edward, who keeps it at bay with a stool while calling out to his brother's name. Frankie wakes up and grabs the knife, and together the brothers try to attack the subsider. The creature jumps away, hanging from the ceiling, which allows Frankie to stab it a few times before cutting its head off. So, the police arrive to take care of the situation and mention that subsiders are now in the suburbs. One officer finds a ring on the creature, which makes Edward realize it used to be the local gardener. She also has self-inflicted wounds, meaning that feeding on themselves makes the mutation faster. The next morning, Edward is woken up by a security alert. He goes to check, and when he turns on the lights, he sees Audrey pointing a crossbow at him. She tells him they have been looking for trustworthy vampires and need his help to find another way besides the substitute. She gives him a piece of paper with a map on it. Edward gets distracted by a noise and turns around, allowing Audrey to quietly leave. When he checks on the noise, it is Frankie, who asks Edward about the woman. Edward says it is nothing. Later that night, the news reports that investors are pulling out their human supplies from Bromley's company. Edward goes to work and asks his boss for a guarantee that the substitute could replace human needs. Bromley replies that most of the population will be happy to have it, but a small number will always want the real thing. Edward reminds him that this includes Bromley's daughter, then heads back to his lab to look at the map. The next morning, Edward does not return home. He turns on the car's light protection and follows the map into the countryside, where he finds Audrey waiting for him. She tells him to come closer to a big tree. He parks under the shade of that tree, puts on a hat and sunglasses, and leaves the car. He carefully avoids the sunlight and approaches an old man named Lionel Elvis Cormack. This man used to be a vampire, but now he is human. Edward wants to know how, but just then, Audrey comes closer, held at gunpoint by Frankie. Edward wants to stop him, but Frankie won't listen. Army backup is already arriving. Audrey pushes Frankie into the sunlight and joins the men, taking Edward's car because the soldiers have started shooting and destroyed Lionel's vehicle. They are chased and shot at while driving, making holes in the car's dark protection. At first, Audrey covers them with her hands, but there are too many bullets, and the camera gets shot too. Edward can't see ahead. Lionel takes over the wheel so he can look through a hole and Edward can hide from the light. When they reach a rickety bridge, Lionel drives as fast as he can to cross safely, but the army truck is too heavy, causing the bridge to collapse and the truck to explode. The rest of the soldiers are left behind without a way to follow. After night falls, they park near a river, and Lionel tells Edward his story. He used to work on cars that were modified to drive in the daylight and had one of the first shops in town that did this. Daylight driving is great because there are no other people around, but can also be dangerous for the driver. That's what happened to Edward. He wasn't feeling well because he hadn't fed, and crashed the car into the river fence. The crash threw him from the car, and he lit on fire before falling into the river. When he came out, he was human again. Lionel and Audrey want Edward to safely recreate these conditions. Back at the company, Bromley is looking at pictures of his daughter when Frankie arrives. Bromley praises him for reporting what happened and tells him if Edward comes back right away, no charges will be filed against him. Frankie agrees to do anything Bromley asks of him. Meanwhile, Edward and the humans are back in his car, heading to their safe house. Edward can't stop looking at Audrey's neck. When she notices this and his pointy ears, she cuts her hand and pours some blood into a cup for him to drink. He refuses at first, but Audrey wants to make sure the other humans will be safe around him, so he takes the cup and drinks it. A few hours later, they arrive at an old vineyard, where Edward meets other humans, including Jarvis, who leads a group of rescuers searching for more humans. After going inside the house, he also meets Senator Wes Turner, a vampire politician who supports human rights and finding a cure. Then we see Bromley looking at how one of his machines has lost all its humans while his researchers take out a body. We also see a coffee stand at the subway station where a man complains that his coffee does not have enough blood. The employee tells him that 5% is all she is allowed to serve, but he refuses to accept this. He steals a blood bag, and when it breaks, blood splatters everyone around, causing chaos. People riot and attack the coffee stand for more blood, leading to police coming in and using electricity to stop them. The next morning, at the vineyard, Edward takes some blood from Lionel to run tests while asking him questions about how he felt when he became human. Edward thinks maybe the only way to treat blood is inside the body, controlling the daylight burns. After some hours, when he leaves the lab to take a break, most humans move away from him. Audrey comes and tells him that even though they may fear him, they still think he can help. Edward admits he did not want to turn into a vampire, but Frankie betrayed him and turned him anyway. Then, Edward notices the fermentation tanks, and after Audrey confirms they are airtight, they check them from inside. The tanks have air extractors that let them put out the fire, so Edward decides to use them for their experiment, and they start working on the necessary changes. Later, in the middle of the night, Jarvis's group is driving a convoy of rescued humans to the vineyard, including Bromley's daughter, Allison. When a gunshot causes a flat tire, they must stop. They get out with their weapons ready, but the army surrounds them, and after a short gunfight, all the humans are captured. Allison contacts the vineyard before she falls unconscious, so when Frankie takes the walkie-talkie from her, they use it to track the call and find out where the vineyard is. At the vineyard, all the humans are packing up their things and getting into their cars, ready to follow Turner to his safe house. But Edward wants to stay because there won't be another chance to recreate the experiment. Lionel and Audrey decide to stay behind too and help him. Back at Bromley's, Allison wakes up in her father's office and grabs a knife when he comes in. Allison begs her father to save her friends, and while Bromley is glad to see her, he admits he can't help them. Allison pushes him away and tries to run to the door but is knocked out by a soldier when Bromley realizes his daughter has stabbed him. When morning comes to the vineyard, the experiment is ready. Audrey will watch the monitors while Lionel stays in the tank with Edward, who has a heart monitor connected to his chest and is covered with a wet blanket. The process is simple. They open a hole in the tank to let sunlight burn Edward, then use the air extractor to stop the fire. The first 2 attempts fail, but they let Edward burn longer for the 3rd try, and this time it works. Edward becomes human again. Their joy is interrupted when the army arrives to raid the place, but they avoid getting caught by hiding in a wine barrel. Back at the company, Frankie visits Bromley, who is being treated for his wound. Bromley asks Frankie to do something for him, and Frankie leaves to see Allison in her cell. She still refuses to be turned, but Frankie goes ahead and bites her. Back at the vineyard, the trio leaves their hiding place after ensuring it is safe. Edward steps outside and is amazed that sunlight is touching his skin without burning him. Lionel goes to get an old car. Meanwhile, at the company, Bromley sees that all his machines are empty now. He checks on his daughter, who isn't drinking her blood rations. Bromley walks into her cell and finds she is biting herself, which will make her mutate. She attacks him and blames him for everything before being taken away. After the military imposes martial law so they can freely fight subsiders on the streets, we see Edward, Audrey, and Lionel arrive at Turner's cabin, only to find all the humans dead. Audrey starts to lose hope, but Edward says he knows someone who can help. After briefly cutting to Christopher escaping from the lab, we see the military dragging subsiders into the sunlight for execution. Allison is among them, and watching her die makes Frankie rethink his position. Later that night, Christopher returns home, where he finds the trio waiting for him. Edward tells him he has a cure, which is better than a substitute, and asks for his help to recreate the experiment. Their conversation is interrupted by the ringing phone, so Christopher leaves the room to answer it. When he takes too long to come back, they become suspicious, so Audrey goes after him while Edward and Lionel check his coat. They find out Christopher left his cell phone open on a call, and now everyone in the company knows where they are. The army arrives, and Audrey is knocked out and captured. However, Lionel and Edward manage to escape using the subwalk tunnels. They decide to hide in an old, abandoned garage, where a subsider attacks them. Just then, Frankie arrives and shoots the creature. When Frankie sees his brother has become human, he confesses that he only turned him because he didn't want Edward to die. Frankie admits he made a mistake and wants to help now, but when Lionel comes closer, Frankie's thirst takes over, and he jumps on Lionel to bite him. Edward stops him just in time, ready to shoot Frankie, but changes his mind when he notices something. Later, we see Edward willingly entering the company building, triggering the alarms because he is now human. Security captures him and takes him to Bromley's office, where Bromley is drinking Audrey's blood while she is tied to a chair. Edward tells him he regrets everything and wants to be a vampire again, making Audrey upset with his betrayal. Bromley shows Edward that they found a substitute, so he no longer needs Edward, and calls Edward a coward. Edward retorts that Bromley is a coward too since he couldn't turn his own daughter. Furious, Bromley bites Edward, but Edward doesn't care. This was his plan all along. Bromley starts turning into a human, and as Edward remembers how Frankie turned, he explains that drinking treated vampire blood is the cure. Bromley presses an alarm to call for security, and we see army trucks arriving outside. When the soldiers get out and approach the elevator, the doors open to show Bromley tied to a chair. This causes the vampires to go into a frenzy and feed on Bromley. Meanwhile, Audrey and Edward, now armed with weapons he found, head downstairs and are about to leave when more soldiers arrive to block them. Frankie suddenly drives Lionel's car inside, crashing into all the soldiers to save his brother. But backup immediately arrives, and they are surrounded. Frankie tells Edward to go before sacrificing himself, letting all the soldiers jump on him and feed on him. Edward doesn't have time to grieve because a security guard has taken Audrey, and he must save her. He follows them to the security room, where, after a fight, Edward kills 2 vampire guards and helps Audrey kill a third. Then they see on the security cameras that the soldiers who fed on Frankie have turned human and are now fighting against the remaining vampire soldiers. A slaughter occurs, and when Edward and Audrey return to the lobby, only a few human soldiers are standing. Then Christopher appears and shoots a couple of soldiers, saying there can't be a cure. He is about to shoot them too when an arrow hits his chest and kills him. It was shot by Lionel, who has come to help. Audrey hugs Lionel while Edward watches his brother's body, and the light of the rising sun slowly comes through. 15 minutes and 54 seconds. The movie ends with the 3 of them leaving in Lionel's car while Edward tells us that now they have the cure, they can turn everyone back. It's not too late.